The Outer Rim Relay Station 7 is remote communications outpost positioned at the edge of Thessari-controlled space, approximately 6 weeks' travel from the nearest inhabited system, using standard commercial transport. It exists for single purpose, maintaining the long-range transmitter array that allows communication between the Thessari Empire's inner core systems and the frontier territories, where expansion is still developing and where reliable communication infrastructure hasn't been fully established. The station is minimal facility, not designed for comfort or for supporting significant population. Just the essential systems required to keep one rotation engineer alive and functional, while they maintain the transmitter equipment that's the facility's entire reason for existence. Life support adequate for single occupant. Engineering workshop with tools and replacement components for transmitter maintenance. Cramped living quarters, sleeping area, small galley, sanitation facilities, recreational space that consists of viewport overlooking the barren moon where the station is positioned, and a limited library of entertainment media for the months of isolation that rotation assignments require. The transmitter array itself dominates the facility. Massive antenna structures and signal processing equipment that requires constant calibration and maintenance to function reliably across the vast distances it's designed to bridge. The station is located on barren moon orbiting uninhabited gas giant in system that has no other strategic or commercial value. The moon has thin atmosphere, breathable for Thessari physiology but requiring environmental suits for any prolonged exposure, especially during the long cold periods when the moon's orbit takes it far from the system's distant star. Surface is dust and rock. No vegetation, no water, no natural resources worth extracting. Just desolation that makes the location perfect for communications relay because there's no interference from other activities and no reason for anyone to visit except for the rotation engineers who maintain the equipment. Most Thessari engineers consider assignment to Relay 7 to be punishment posting, months of complete isolation. No social interaction beyond brief communications with supervisors during weekly check-ins. No entertainment beyond what you bring with you or what the station's limited media library provides. Just you, the machinery, and the emptiness. David Chen is human engineer assigned to 6-month rotation at Relay 7 through the Alliance Technology Exchange Program. Formal arrangement where human and Thessari technical specialists work in each other's facilities to build cross-cultural expertise and to strengthen alliance cooperation through practical collaboration. David volunteered for the assignment despite knowing its reputation as isolation posting. He's a skilled telecommunications specialist whose expertise in signal processing and array maintenance made him valuable enough that Thessari authorities approved him for assignment to facility that rarely sees human personnel, and that most consider too remote for comfortable cross-cultural posting. But David has reasons for accepting isolation. He's coming off difficult breakup of long-term relationship, has been feeling burned out from years of high-pressure engineering work in crowded facilities where social demands were constant. The prospect of 6 months with nothing but technical work and solitude appeals to him in ways that might seem strange to people who thrive on social interaction. But that makes perfect sense to someone who's been craving quiet and simplicity. He arrives at Relay 7 via automated supply shuttle. No human pilot, just cargo delivery system that drops him and 6 months of supplies at the station, and then departs on its programmed route back to civilization. The previous rotation engineer departed 2 weeks earlier on the last supply run, leaving the station unmanned during the transition period while David's assignment was being finalized. Standard procedure. Relay stations can operate unmanned for short periods because the transmitter systems have automated failsafes, and because 2 weeks of unmaintained operation won't cause critical failures. Not ideal, but acceptable given the logistical challenges of coordinating perfectly timed personnel transitions across 6-week travel distances. David goes through the arrival checklist that his training prepared him for. Verify life support systems are functioning properly. Check inventory of supplies against manifest. Inspect critical transmitter components for any failures that develop during the unmanned period. Establish communication with Thessari Engineering Authority to confirm he's arrived and begun his rotation. Everything is routine. Station is in acceptable condition. Some minor maintenance needed on the atmospheric processors, normal where that previous engineer noted in the handover documentation. Transmitter array is functioning within parameters. Supplies match manifest. David settles into the living quarters that will be his home for the next 6 months. Unpacks his personal items, clothing, entertainment media, the physical books he brought because reading actual paper feels more satisfying than screen displays during long isolation. Sets up his sleeping area with the small comforts that will make the cramped space more tolerable. The station is exactly what he expected: austere, functional, isolated. Steel and machinery and dust visible through the viewports showing the barren moon's surface. What he doesn't expect, what nothing in the personnel records or facility documentation prepared him for, is finding that he's not alone. The discovery happens during his first external inspection of the transmitter array. Mandatory safety procedure that new rotation engineers perform within first 48 hours of arrival. Suit up, go outside. Conduct visual inspection of the antenna structures and the signal processing equipment housings to identify any damage or degradation that automated sensors might have missed. David puts on environmental suit, bulky protective gear that supplements the moon's thin atmosphere and maintains comfortable temperature despite the cold surface conditions. Goes through the airlock. Steps out onto the rocky surface with its perpetual layer of fine dust that gets into everything. The transmitter array extends approximately 200 meters from the main station structure. Massive antenna dishes and complex support frameworks. David begins his inspection at the nearest structures, working his way methodically outward according to the checklist protocols. He's approximately halfway through the inspection, examining one of the signal processing nodes, when he sees her. Collapsed near the outer wall of the station's perimeter fence, security barrier that doesn't serve much purpose on uninhabited moon, but that's standard installation for all Thessari facilities. Lying motionless in the dust. Thessari woman, based on the distinctive physiological features visible even at distance, the elongated frame, the chromatic skin patterns, the body structure that's unmistakably different from human physiology. She's wearing environmental suit, but even from 20 meters away David can see it's damaged. Torn fabric at one shoulder, helmet visor cracked, the suit's status indicators showing red failure warnings. She's not moving, not responding to his presence even though he's clearly visible approaching her position. David runs. Not easy in environmental suit and low gravity, but he covers the distance as quickly as the equipment allows. Reaches her and immediately begins emergency assessment. Check breathing, shallow but present. Check suit integrity, compromised atmosphere leaking, oxygen supply depleted. Check for injuries, no obvious trauma, but she's severely dehydrated based on the skin condition he can see through the damaged suit, and she's hypothermic from the exposure. She's dying. Not from acute injury, but from slow degradation. Someone who's been out here too long without adequate resources, whose body is shutting down from environmental stress that she can't survive much longer without intervention. David doesn't waste time trying to understand why she's here or who she is. Just responds with emergency protocols. Activate emergency oxygen supply from his own suit, sharing his air through emergency coupling. Assess whether she can be moved or whether moving her will cause additional harm. Decides moving her is necessary because she'll die if she stays in failed suit on the cold surface. He lifts her carefully. She's tall for Thessari female, nearly his own height, but severely malnourished, weighing far less than her frame suggests she should. Carries her back to the station, through the airlock, into the medical bay. Relay stations maintain basic emergency medical equipment because rotation engineers are months away from proper medical facilities and need ability to treat injury or illness that might occur during their assignments. Not sophisticated medical center, but enough to handle trauma, infection, environmental exposure, the likely emergencies that isolated personnel might face. David strips away the damaged environmental suit, gets her onto the medical bay's treatment bed, establishes IV line to address the severe dehydration, attaches monitors to track vital signs, uses the thermal blankets to address the hypothermia. Her breathing stabilizes slightly with the supplemental oxygen and the controlled environment. The monitors show heartbeat that's weak but regular. She's not out of immediate danger, but she's no longer actively dying. Only then, once the emergency response is complete, and she's as stable as his limited medical capabilities can make her, does David actually look at her carefully enough to notice the details that should have been obvious immediately, but that emergency protocols push to background of his awareness. The chromatic patterns on her skin aren't just generic Thessari markings. They're specific, elaborate patterns that his cultural briefings identified as indicators of social status and lineage. Royal markings, high-ranking nobility, possibly imperial family based on the particular color arrangements and the complexity of the designs. And now that he's looking more carefully, he sees other evidence. The environmental suit she was wearing, despite being damaged, is high-quality construction, not standard issue but custom-made with refinements that suggest significant wealth. Her clothing under the suit, though filthy and torn, shows craftsmanship and materials that aren't available to common citizens. She's royalty, dying alone on remote relay station where she absolutely should not be according to any legitimate reason David can imagine. David spends the next several hours monitoring her vital signs and providing continued medical support as her body begins recovering from the acute crisis. The dehydration responds to IV fluids. Her core temperature gradually normalizes under the thermal blankets. Her breathing becomes deeper and more regular as adequate oxygen and controlled environment allow her respiratory system to function properly again. But as the immediate emergency stabilizes, David begins noticing additional concerning details that tell story of prolonged suffering rather than recent accident. Pressure sores on her shoulders and hips, marks that develop when someone wears environmental suit for extended periods without removing it, when the suit's internal pressure points create tissue damage from constant contact. These aren't fresh injuries. They're partially healed lesions that have developed over days or weeks of continuous suit wear. Severe muscle wasting beyond what simple dehydration would cause. She's been malnourished for extended period. Her body has been cannibalizing its own muscle tissue to maintain essential functions because adequate nutrition hasn't been available. Her hands show evidence of manual labor, calluses, minor cuts and abrasions, the kind of wear that develops when someone has been doing physical work without proper tools or protection. Royalty doesn't typically show those signs. Whatever she's been doing out here, it hasn't involved the kind of supported lifestyle that noble status usually provides. Most concerning. Now that David has removed the damaged environmental suit and examined it more carefully, he recognizes that the damage isn't from accident or normal wear. The oxygen supply system has been deliberately compromised, subtle sabotage that would cause slow failure rather than immediate catastrophic breach. Someone wanted the suit to fail gradually, wanted whoever was wearing it to die slowly from oxygen deprivation and exposure rather than from sudden decompression. David searches the station's computer systems for any record of who she is or why she's here. Checks personnel databases for scheduled arrivals or authorized visitors. reviews maintenance logs for any indication that someone other than rotation engineers was supposed to be at the facility, scans communication records for emergency calls or distress signals that might explain her presence. Nothing. No records. No notifications. No evidence in any official system that anyone beyond David himself is supposed to be at this station. She was sent here to disappear. That's the only explanation that fits the evidence. Exiled to remote facility where no one would witness what happened to her. Provided with sabotaged equipment that would ensure her death through slow equipment failure that could be attributed to accident rather than to deliberate abandonment. Left to die alone where no rescue would come because officially, she isn't here. The station's isolation, the very quality that makes it miserable posting for engineers who value social interaction, makes it perfect location for exile that no one will acknowledge. 6 weeks from the nearest inhabited system. Minimal automated supply runs that don't include human personnel who might discover unauthorized occupants. Communication system that's monitored remotely, but that doesn't involve regular personal check-ins where station occupants might report unexpected findings. David faces decision that has immediate and potentially serious long-term implications. He could report finding her through official channels. Use the communication array he's here to maintain to notify Thessari authorities that there's someone at Relay Station 7 who doesn't appear in any personnel records. Request guidance about what to do with injured royal who shouldn't be here. That would be proper protocol. By-the-book response to discovering unauthorized person at facility where he has responsibility for maintaining security and operational integrity. But David's instincts, developed through 15 years of working in complex cross-cultural contexts, where political complications are often more dangerous than technical failures, suggest that reporting her might simply result in completing the execution that her exile was designed to accomplish. Whoever sent her here intended her to die quietly. Whoever sabotaged her environmental suit wanted her death to look like equipment failure. Whoever left no official record of her presence wanted her to be forgotten rather than formally executed. If David reports finding her, he provides those anonymous actors with opportunity to finish what they started, perhaps through official channels that would make her death look like necessary response to security breach, or perhaps through unofficial intervention that would ensure she dies from complications before she can be extracted from the station. He sits in the medical bay, watching her unconscious form connected to the monitors that track her slowly improving vital signs, and makes choice that's probably going to complicate his life considerably, but that feels morally necessary despite the complications. He's not reporting her, not telling Thessari authorities, not giving whoever tried to kill her another opportunity to finish the job. She'll stay hidden. David will continue maintaining the station and the communication array exactly as his assignment requires, performing all his technical duties without deviation from protocols. But he'll divert station resources to caring for the collapsed royal he found dying outside, and he'll keep her existence secret from the authorities who would probably ensure her death if they learned she survived. It's mercy over protocol. Possibly stupid decision that could end his career or worse if it goes wrong. But looking at the evidence of deliberate abandonment and sabotaged equipment, David can't bring himself to be complicit in her murder through official reporting. Over the next 72 hours, her condition continues improving. The acute medical crisis resolves. Her vital signs stabilize at levels that aren't healthy but that aren't immediately life-threatening. She remains unconscious, combination of severe exhaustion and the mild sedation that medical bay's automated systems administered to keep her resting while her body recovered from the trauma. On the 4th day after David found her, she regains consciousness. Her eyes open slowly, confusion visible in her expression as she processes unfamiliar surroundings, the medical bay, the monitoring equipment, the human standing nearby watching her vital signs on the displays. She tries to speak, but her voice is rough from dehydration and disuse. David helps her drink water carefully, small sips to avoid overwhelming her recovering system. Her second attempt at speech is clearer. "Where am I?" "At Relay Station 7, David answers. "I found you collapsed outside 4 days ago. You were dying from exposure and equipment failure. I brought you inside and stabilized you." She processes this information with expression that shifts from confusion to something darker, resignation, maybe, or despair. "You should have left me to die. That was the point of sending me here." "Probably," David acknowledges. "But I'm engineer, not executioner. I found you dying, and I responded with emergency medical protocols. Whoever sent you here to die can deal with the consequences of you surviving." She studies him with intensity that makes David uncomfortable. "You're human. You don't owe loyalty." Over the following days, as her physical recovery continues and she regains enough strength to move around the medical bay, and eventually to transfer to the station's living quarters, the full story emerges through careful conversations where David asks minimal questions, and she volunteers information when she's ready. Her name is Serafina. She's daughter of one of the Thessari Empire's most powerful noble houses, not direct heir to the imperial throne, but close enough to the succession that her marriage alliances and political positions matter significantly to the factional struggles that govern Thessari high politics. 3 months ago, she refused arranged marriage that her family had negotiated with rival noble house. The marriage would have created powerful alliance between the two houses, would have served both families' political interests, would have secured advantages that careful dynastic planning had been working toward for years. Serafina refused because the proposed marriage was to someone she'd never met, because she wanted autonomy over her own life rather than serving as political pawn in factional games, because she believed that royal daughters should have rights to choose their own futures rather than existing primarily to create alliances through strategic marriages. Her refusal was public, made during formal ceremony where the engagement was supposed to be announced, created scandal that embarrassed both families and disrupted political arrangements that had been carefully constructed. Her family's response was to erase her, not through public execution. That would create martyrs and questions, would invite scrutiny about whether arranged marriages should still be acceptable practice in modern Thessari society, would potentially destabilize the very political structures the marriage was supposed to strengthen. Instead, quiet exile, removed from court under pretense of health retreat, that nobles sometimes take when they need time away from political pressures, transported to increasingly remote locations under escort that prevented her from communicating with anyone outside her family's control, eventually delivered to Relay Station 7 with minimal supplies and with environmental suit that had been sabotaged to fail slowly. Official story: if anyone ever questioned her disappearance, she chose voluntary isolation for personal reasons, suffered unfortunate equipment failure while engaging in dangerous solo exploration, died before rescue could be arranged. Tragic loss of promising young royal who made regrettable choice to isolate herself from family support. Reality: deliberate murder disguised as accident, carried out through exile and sabotage rather than through direct violence. "I knew what was happening," Serafina tells David during one of their conversations. "When they brought me here and left me with the damaged suit and minimal supplies, I understood that this was execution method. Slow death from exposure and starvation. Alone where no one would witness. Where my death could be attributed to my own choices rather than to family's decision to eliminate me for defying their political plans." "Why not try to escape?" David asks. "If you knew they intended you to die, why stay at the station?" "Where would I escape to?" Serafina responds. "I'm on barren moon in uninhabited system 6 weeks from nearest civilization. I have no ship. No way to call for rescue because the communication system requires technical knowledge I don't possess. Even if I could send distress signal, It would reach my family's allies before it reached anyone who might help me. Staying at the station and trying to survive as long as possible was the only option I had. You were trying to survive when I found you, David observes. The manual labor evidence on your hands, you were doing something more than just waiting to die. I was trying to repair the environmental suit, Serafina admits. I don't have engineering training, but the station has workshop with tools. I thought if I could fix the oxygen system, I might survive long enough that someone would eventually arrive. A supply run, a new rotation engineer, anyone who might help or who I could convince to report my presence. But the sabotage was too sophisticated for you to repair without proper training, David concludes. Yes, Serafina confirms. I kept the suit functional for additional few weeks beyond when it should have failed, but I couldn't fully repair it. Eventually, it degraded to the point where I couldn't survive outside anymore. I was making final attempt to reach the communication array, thought if I could get to the transmitter equipment, maybe I could activate some kind of distress signal even without knowing the proper protocols, when the suit failed completely and I collapsed. I found you about 6 hours after that final failure, David says, based on your vital signs when I brought you in. If I'd arrived a day earlier or a day later, you'd probably be dead now. Timing that I don't believe in coincidence enough to attribute to pure chance, Serafina observes. You were assigned to this station specifically when I was on the edge of dying. Someone either arranged that timing deliberately, or the universe has strange sense of dramatic narrative. More likely just timing, David says. I was assigned here through routine personnel rotation. No one in Thessari politics knew or cared when human engineer would arrive at remote relay station. You survived just long enough that my arrival coincided with your final attempt to reach the communication array. They develop routines over the following weeks. David continues maintaining the transmitter array and the station systems exactly as his assignment requires. He conducts the weekly check-ins with Thessari Engineering Authority, reports on equipment status, performs all the technical work that rotation engineer is supposed to do. But he also diverts station resources to supporting Serafina's recovery and continued survival. The life support systems can handle 2 people instead of 1 without strain. They're designed with enough redundancy that supporting additional occupant doesn't create operational problems. Food supplies are more challenging because David only brought 6 months of rations for himself. But between careful rationing and the fact that Serafina needs less food during her recovery than she would at full health, they can make the supplies last until the next automated delivery in 4 months. Serafina insists on contributing rather than remaining dependent. David teaches her basic station maintenance, not the complex transmitter work that requires his expertise, but the routine tasks like monitoring atmospheric processors, conducting equipment checks, maintaining the living quarters. She learns quickly despite having no previous technical training, applying the intelligence and discipline that her royal education developed even if it never included practical engineering skills. She teaches David Thessari cultural nuances in return, the subtleties of their language that formal instruction never quite captures, the political dynamics that govern noble families and that explain the context for her exile, the philosophical frameworks that Thessari society uses to think about duty and autonomy, and the tension between individual choice and collective obligation. They share the profound isolation. 2 people alone on barren moon, cut off from civilization by 6 weeks of travel and by political circumstances that make both of them vulnerable if their situation becomes known. For David, the isolation he sought is complicated by responsibility for another person's survival, and by the political danger he's accepted by choosing not to report her. But it's also less lonely than he expected. Companionship with someone who understands exile and solitude in ways that make the silence feel shared rather than isolating. For Serafina, survival becomes something more than just enduring until death finally claims her. She begins rebuilding sense of identity beyond the political role that led to her exile. She's not royal daughter whose value comes from marriage alliances. She's person learning practical skills, contributing to shared survival, discovering capabilities she never developed when her life was defined entirely by court politics and dynastic obligations. They argue sometimes about whether David should have reported finding her. Serafina maintains he took foolish risk. About Thessari cultural practices that David finds problematic, arranged marriages in particular. About how to ration supplies and allocate their limited resources. But mostly, they develop something resembling friendship, built on shared isolation, on mutual dependence, on the reality that they're the only two sentient beings in this entire system, and that survival requires cooperation regardless of species differences or political complications. 3 months after David found her collapsed outside, they're sharing evening meal in the small galley when Serafina asks, "What happens when your rotation ends? When the replacement engineer arrives in 3 months? You can't hide me from whoever takes over this station." David has been thinking about that question since the day he decided not to report finding her. "I get you out before my replacement arrives. Hide you in supply containers when the shuttle comes to rotate personnel. Transport you somewhere outside Thessari political jurisdiction, where you can disappear into Alliance territory and build life that your family can't reach." That's smuggling, Serafina observes, violating multiple Thessari laws, potentially creating diplomatic incident if you're caught. "Yes," David agrees. "Also the only option I can think of that doesn't result in you dying once my rotation ends, and I can't protect you anymore." The extraction plan that David develops over the remaining months is risky, but feasible. The supply shuttle that delivers rotation engineers and equipment to Relay Station 7 is automated cargo system. No human pilot who would notice unauthorized passenger, just routing algorithms that deliver containers to designated locations. The containers themselves are large enough to accommodate person in temporary hidden compartment, if that person can tolerate several hours of uncomfortable confinement during transit. The shuttle's route includes multiple stops before returning to inhabited systems where Thessari authorities would inspect cargo. One of those intermediate stops is Alliance Transfer Station, where human and Thessari cargo gets sorted for distribution to different destinations. That transfer station is neutral territory, where Serafina could disappear into the general population, if she can reach it hidden in supposedly empty supply container. David fabricates hidden compartment in one of the return supply containers, modifies the internal structure to create space where Serafina can hide with enough air supply and emergency provisions to survive the journey. The modification is subtle enough that casual inspection won't reveal it, though thorough security scan would detect the anomaly. Risk calculation. Supply containers returning from remote relay stations rarely receive thorough inspection because they're supposed to be empty or carrying only damaged equipment being returned for recycling. Security focuses on incoming cargo that might contain contraband or threats. Outgoing containers from unmanned facilities are low priority for detailed scanning, not guaranteed safe passage, but reasonable probability that Serafina can reach the transfer station without being discovered. And once she's there, she can claim asylum through alliance systems that don't automatically honor Thessari political authority over their own citizens. 3 days before David's replacement engineer is scheduled to arrive, they load the modified supply container with the emergency provisions Serafina will need. Test the compartment to ensure the air supply and the internal space are adequate. Run through emergency protocols for what she should do if the container is inspected or if she experiences medical crisis during the journey. This is insane plan built on multiple layers of hope and luck. Serafina observes as they're finalizing preparations. You're risking significant consequences if anyone discovers what you're doing. Why are you doing this instead of just letting me face whatever comes when the new engineer arrives? Because you survived this far and you deserve chance to live rather than being executed for refusing arranged marriage, David says. Because finding you when you'd been intentionally forgotten, helping you survive when you were supposed to die, that means something. Can't save you from immediate death, and then abandon you to slower execution just because my rotation is ending. Human mercy at the edge of politics, Serafina says quietly. Defying the intentions of people who wanted me erased. You're making this into act of resistance whether you frame it that way or not. I'm making it into logistics problem that I'm solving with engineering and risk tolerance, David corrects. The political resistance is side effect. The day before the supply shuttle is scheduled to arrive, they share final meal together in the station's galley. 6 months of isolation and shared survival coming to end. David returning to civilization and to his normal engineering career. Serafina heading into unknown future as exile who will have to build entirely new life outside the political structures that defined her existence, until her family decided she was too troublesome to keep alive. What will you do once you reach the transfer station? David asks. Disappear, Serafina says. Change my name. Obscure the royal markings well enough that casual observers won't recognize them. Find work that uses whatever skills I've developed. I can do basic technical maintenance now thanks to your teaching. Maybe that's enough to get hired somewhere that doesn't ask too many questions about background. Build life that doesn't depend on family connections or political position. That's significant loss, David observes. Everything you had before, the status, the resources, the identity, all of that gone. Everything I had before was prison built from dynastic obligations and political expectations, Serafina counters. Status that required me to be marriage pawn. Resources that came with conditions I couldn't accept. Identity defined entirely by family's political needs rather than by anything I chose. Losing that isn't loss. It's freedom that I didn't know how to claim until exile forced me to recognize that I'd rather die free than live as political tool. Will you try to reclaim your position eventually? David asks. Contact family, negotiate return, seek throne if you're in succession line. No, Serafina says with certainty. The throne and the forgiveness, if either were ever available, would come with same conditions I rejected before. Acceptance of political role that treats me as asset rather than as person. I'd rather build new identity from nothing than reclaim old one that required abandoning autonomy. That's remarkably clear conviction for someone who's about to be smuggled out in cargo container, David observes. 6 months of survival in isolation provides time for clarity, Serafina replies. When you're dying alone on remote moon, you have opportunity to think carefully about what matters and what doesn't. Political position and family approval, those don't matter when you're suffocating in damaged environmental suit. Autonomy and the chance to choose your own path, those matter even when dying. I'm choosing future where I control my own life, even if that future is built from exile and obscurity. The next day, the supply shuttle arrives on schedule. David helps Serafina into the hidden compartment in the modified supply container, ensures her emergency supplies are secured, activates the air system, seals the compartment with fasteners that can be opened from inside if she needs emergency exit. Good luck, he says before closing the outer container. You survived being left to die. You can survive building new life. Thank you, Serafina responds, for finding me when I was supposed to be forgotten, for helping when you had no obligation to care, for choosing mercy when protocol would have been easier. You saved more than my life. You saved my ability to believe that autonomy is worth fighting for. David seals the container, loads it with the other return cargo onto the shuttle. watches the automated system depart with its hidden passenger heading toward uncertain freedom. 6 weeks later, after David has returned to his normal engineering assignments, after his adventure at Relay Station 7 has become strange memory rather than immediate reality, he receives anonymous message through secure channel. Reached transfer station safely, claimed asylum through Alliance systems, building new life under new name, working as technical maintenance specialist at mid-size commercial station. Free. Thank you for making that possible. S. In a remote outpost, a human found the banished royal daughter collapsed and alone. She was sent there to disappear. No attendants, no guards, no record anyone will admit to later. He recognized the signs of exile even without knowing her name, stabilized her, brought her inside, only afterward noticed the insignia that explained why no rescue ever came. Human mercy at the edge of politics. Finding someone when they've been intentionally forgotten becoming act of defiance. Survival shared in isolation, rebuilding identity long before thrones or forgiveness are ever reclaimed. Because sometimes saving someone means more than emergency medical response. Sometimes it means choosing to help when helping is politically dangerous. Sometimes it means enabling escape from the very power structures that tried